welcome. Thank you for joining me for this conversation. As always, I'm Abbie. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told, and here's my question for today. What is stopping us from really leaning into and embracing and living out our full humanity? And when I talk about full humanity, I mean the entire spectrum of human emotions and the entire spectrum of human traits and qualities, and basically what I think to be our truest, most beautiful selves are ones that are completely unencumbered by the norms or expectations that society has put on us. And what comes to mind is expectations that society has put on us because of gender, because of ability, because of race, because of fill in the blank. Maybe you can come up with some other ways that the expectations of society feels like it is stopping you from being your fullest, truest self. I just think the human experience is so vast and complex, and we deserve to experience all of it. This is the question I want us to be thinking about today because it's part of this conversation that we are finishing up in today's episode with Rebekah Taussig. So this is part 3 of this conversation. If you haven't listened to parts 1 and 2, definitely go back and do that first. Those are linked in the description so you can find those easily. But today we are finishing up our conversation with Rebekah, and this is just a short little episode to kind of wrap things up. But this humanity piece is something that we talk about in this part of the conversation, and kind of the lens that we use to reflect on the rest of our conversation, ending with the idea of what a better social world could look like if we are all allowed to embrace our full humanity. And maybe that means something different to you. I'd be curious to know what comes to mind when I talk about our full humanity. Anyway, with that question in mind, let's jump into part 3 of our conversation with Rebekah.
So, I have your book heavily sticky noted, and I'll say that there's 2 sticky notes before the actual book even starts. So I have one on your dedication and one in the preface. And the way you start the preface, which I see as an act of contextualizing the book, is that you start with awe. And so that very much resonates with me. I love the ideas of awe and wonder in our lives and seeking those out and using those as lenses. And so I just wanted to ask about awe in your life and what brings you awe and what does it mean to you?
Oh, I love that question. I mean, I think the awe that I felt in the book was, and I still feel around the book is how I could put words into a little document that I would send to an editor that would get printed on the pages of a book that would end up in a library that you would walk by. Like, that is unbelievable to me. It is still unbelievable to me. I mean, I know people read books, and that seems more commonplace to me, that they would read my book. Feels like, that feels that these personal things that have occurred in my life would be meaningful to other people, and that we could connect over that it fills me with awe. I think, gosh, especially over the last few years, that a lot of that awe was dimmed just by how hard things have felt and how much suffering and frustration and disconnection and that there has been over the last few years started to dim some of that awe and make me feel naive for having it at certain points. And I think I have felt that slowly returning a little bit. I have gotten to, so when this book came out in August of 2020, I didn't go on a book tour. I did a lot of Zooms from the same little tiny room in my house as and my son was just born, so we really weren't going anywhere. And in the last 6 months or so, I have been able to meet more groups of people around this book. And I think that awe has just sort of blossomed and bloomed even more in thinking. I just went to Northeast Nebraska, Norfolk, Nebraska, this like small town in Nebraska that did a community read around my book. And so they they gave away free copies to anyone who wanted
Wow.
one in the town. And they did all of this programming around disability and like, for the people living in that community. They did like, they had like a whole pamphlet full of free programming that they put on for the community. So, and it involved things like, they would listen to a chapter of the book every week and do puzzles in color while they listened to it at the library. And they
That's
would do,
adorable.
it was amazing. And they did, they had this puppet troupe come that, every puppeteer had a disability and their puppet had that same disability. And they put on this puppet show for preschoolers. And then the preschoolers could ask questions to the puppeteers, and then they could ask questions to the puppets. And they, they had like, they brought the, like sort of the city planners to a panel, and they had them listening to people in the community with disabilities talk about their experiences in that town and strategize ways to actually, like, this library needs a new parking space and this building needs a curb cut. And you know, like they like, oh, this place should have an adult changing station, like, very tangible, specific, but also big picture theoretical. And that's just like one example of people that I've met that I have felt so much awe over, like, that in this, what has felt like this bleak streak of like, humans don't care about each other anymore. And like, we can't work together because we can't agree on anything. And like seeing these little pockets of humans that are building something beautiful and, with curiosity and like listening and collaboration, has made me feel like, oh, right. This is what we are as humans and what we can be. So I felt awe about that. I have to say, probably like at least 4 times a day, I feel complete awe looking at my son's face. Like, how did we make you? And this is wild that you are here with your own brain and your own words that you would choose and your own preferences. And, it's I feel awe even just like hearing his voice and seeing his face makes me feel awe. I think I think that I feel a lot of, and have, like, for a lot of my life have felt a lot of awe about the fact, you know, like, we're here, that humans, like, what are we doing? That we exist at all, that we've made anything, that we can pick words and make sounds with our mouths that mean things to each other. Like, I feel awe about that. So, I do feel a lot of awe, and I'm grateful that I feel, some of the awe that had dimmed sort of start to plump up again as I get to have these experiences. And that's not to say, I mean, like, our favorite theme of this podcast episode, the both and, it's not to say that there is not also a lot to work against and a lot of weariness and suffering that very much still exists around us. But I think that I was, for a bit, felt like I was kind of drowning in that and only being able to see that. And maybe the awe is increased in just the contrast of what is also happening and what is also true.
Yeah, I think it's so true that the joy and the beauty exist at the exact same time, if not in the exact same moments as like the pain and the suffering. And for me, I think what all of it comes back to is I just want the sharing of stories to help people find a way back to be able to reclaim their full humanity, is maybe how I would put it. In terms of, like, I think about it in terms of gender a lot. If we're saying, here's all the qualities of human beings, you get this half and you other people get this half, we're, you know, like gatekeeping half of the qualities because we said that gender means whatever it means and you are this one and you get these qualities or you get these colors. Again, meaning making, that is ridiculous.
Yes.
Like I think I mentioned to you in some emails we exchanged, like, I just want to change, not that I think I could personally do this, but I want to be a part of changing the narrative around, like, there is a default story that's a human story, and that's, I would say very traditionally, like, that story comes from a white able-bodied man. And then all the other stories, like, when I tell a story, it's about what it means to be a woman, or when you tell a story, it's about what it means to be a disabled woman, rather than when I tell a story, it's about what it means to be human. And the same for, you know, it's like how can we reclaim our full humanity through storytelling?
Yeah.
And that humanity, again, it's that messiness, it's that complexity, it's that exact intersection where the joy and the suffering exist together. That's maybe like my like light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Like goal thing that we're moving toward and aiming for. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to hear you say, how did you word it? Restore our humanity?
Our full humanity, maybe.
Full humanity. Because I think that resonates with me a lot in thinking about what I hope stories, I don't know, like what I would also like to participate in, and from like, if you're thinking about gender, and how we get like restoring our ability to be full human beings, regardless of these arbitrary boxes and meaning that we've ascribed to colors. Just one of the more absurd parts of it all. But I think about when I think about disability and the story, like what some of those stories might be able to offer some people, I do think about restoring humanity. I think about the ways that we have, as a culture, seem to have decided to pretend like we don't have bodies, or ignore our bodies, disconnect from our bodies, conquer our bodies, as opposed to like existing in them and letting them be and experiencing all of the joy and frustration of whatever that is. I think that like I feel like there's a lot of denial about mortality, like we're pretending that and aging, like these things that are so built into, like, more than almost any part of being here. Aging and death are a part of living in a body, and we have so much denial and pretending around those things in a way that I think creates so much more suffering, and part of that comes back to stories. I think part of the reason that we are horrified of aging is the meaning that we've ascribed to it, like what it means to age.
Exactly.
That somehow, like, when you reach a certain age, that you are no longer viable, you're no longer useful, you're no longer, you don't have anything to offer, your life is over. I mean, you think about the stories that we have, how many of them include older people, and what storylines are available to people who have gray hair, you know, like it's ridiculous in the way that we look at things, like as if the only stories that people have are like in their early 20s. I don't, you know, like, I think that we have created a lot of meaning around what these things are and can be. And I hope that, I think that in some ways, stories of disability can expand how we imagine what it means to live in a body that changes, that breaks, that scars, that ages, that sags, that like whatever those things are. It can mean a lot of things. And what if it meant this? You know, what if it meant a deeper life? What if it meant enriching? What if it meant, you know, what if it could mean these other things too? What if it was something to respect? I think about that a lot in terms of, like when I became a mom, it was really very startling to me how much of motherhood felt like my experience of disability, but how culturally the narratives that we have for motherhood and disability are like pushed across the globe. Like they could not be separated more. And it's interesting to me that like, part of it was the intensity of the both and of that. But how interesting it is to me that when someone announces that they're going to have a baby, it's always automatic celebration. And when somebody is disabled, it's automatic in one note tragedy. But how interesting it is that both are both and we've chosen to, anyways, we've ascribed one meaning to one and one meaning to the other when both are both, like both are so many things at once. It's interesting.
It's so interesting. I think segueing us perfectly into this note that I want to end on, which is I kind of see as just like an opportunity to kind of like recap our conversation using the language of CMM of what is your definition or your vision for what a better social world could look like?
Yeah.
And then kind of the follow up to that of like, what do we need to do to get there? And what are the new stories that we need to start telling, and that you're already starting to tell you through all the work that you do, that can be part of what gets us there?
Yeah. Thank you for that question, because that's a great question to end on. I think that in terms of what's the right language? A social world. Yeah. Like the social world that we want to move toward is a lot of what we talked about. I think it's building a world that reflects all the people who live in it and invites all of the people who live in it to be a part of making it and building it.
Yeah. It's
amazing to me how few people have been involved in making it and are represented in it. And I do think that's changing in really exciting ways, but it's quite striking to think about that when you think about all of the other people who live here and exist here and are part of the world. So I think that's part of it. And I think the other part of it that I would point to is that desire for us to be able to be fully human. I think that the setup we have here, at least in the US, which is my experience of the world, seems to think of our bodies as more as machines than as humans, and more, and being able to let go of that notion and lean into and embrace the bodies that we have and what it means to live in a body. And I mean, like, even down to just like how much I think that some of that came out in the pandemic when suddenly people were working from home and wearing comfortable clothes. Like, you know, like, oh, wow, like I feel better when I take my body into consideration. What would it be like to build a world around the actual lived experience of a body and to pay attention to it? So I think those are things I imagine for a better social world. And in terms of how we get there, I mean, obviously I'm a bit biased, but I do strongly believe that storytelling I believe that storytelling is the most powerful force on earth. I really do. I think it shapes everything, and any powerful tool that you would point to is used and kind of, we figure out how we use that tool based on the story that we tell. Right. And so I think that so much of that has to do with the stories that we are both making and putting out into the world, and both choosing to receive and listen to. And I think when it comes to disability in particular, there is a unique history of having those stories told by people who don't know the experience. For the vast majority of our history of storytelling, disability is represented by people observing that experience, but not living it. And so I think prioritizing the stories of the lived experience told through the perspective of the ones who've lived it is really important. So like, and I'm also really eager and invested in like amplifying the real history of some of the people who've been a part of this disability community and movement, like Judy Heumann, right? I went through the vast majority of my life never knowing any part of disability history. And I want that part of our history to be brought into the whole story of human history, of what we're doing here. So I think those things are really important. And I feel cautiously hopeful that that's what we're moving toward. I think, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. But I see that happening more and more. Like Ryan O'Connell is a gay man with CP who has wrote a memoir and then turned that memoir. He was the writer and actor of the Netflix series Special, which was 2 seasons of just like authentic disability storytelling. That was beautiful that they made that, and that's in the world. And I hope for more and more and more of stories like that to be out in the world. And I think for people who aren't like screenwriters and directors, I think so much of that is listening. I think that because we have so much momentum of like harmful storytelling or a lack of storytelling about the experience of disability, the work of listening is really crucial right now. And there are a lot of people with disabilities that are telling their stories and it's not difficult to find people that know that experience sharing that experience right now. So I would say listening to that is really crucial and important and powerful.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was going to offer, which is, again, from your book, is I had it written down just at the very end of a chapter, kind of your, in a way, like a call to action was you use the words ask, listen, adapt, expand. And I'm definitely going to adapt those and use those in every context. And I can just see how those feel like some good words and verbs to take with us as we are on the path to creating the better social world that looks like everything you just described, the better social world that looks like all of us living in our full humanity, the better social world that looks like all of us experiencing more awe and joy and in all of it. Ask, listen, adapt, expand feels like really good because, it's like you could ask, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to listen, or you could listen, but that doesn't mean you're going to do anything about it. And so I think all of those four kind of working together feels like good tools to keep with us.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you for that. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want to share before we end?
Thank you. I mean, I loved your questions. Thank you so much. And for the bits of education that I was taking notes on things that you were saying too. So I loved it. Thank you so much for inviting me. This has been the best.
I've had such a great time. And I know you have the awe about, I had these stories, I got to write these stories, so I wanted to publish it. It got into a bookshelf, it got into Abbie's hands. I have awe that the book came into my hands and then I reached out to you and then you answered and then now we're here talking. That's where my awe is. And I am so thankful to get to do this and get to talk to people like you, because this is how I experience awe regularly in my life, is that I, hang up, put my headphones down, and I'm like, I can't believe I get paid to talk to such great people and have such meaningful conversations. Yeah, well, I just really appreciate your time today and your perspective and all the work that you put out in the world.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, that is all for our conversation with Rebekah. I found each part of this conversation to be so meaningful and thought-provoking, and I hope that you found some meaning in it as well for yourself. As far as next turns, where we want to go from this conversation, I want us to keep thinking about some questions, some things that relate back to what we talked about today and over the course of the last 3 episodes. I'm going to point you back to the questions that I asked in the top of the description. If you're looking at that, you can find them written out there. And those questions are, what does it mean to live in a body? What is keeping us from reclaiming our full humanity? And how can we embrace the experience of having a body in a way that empowers us as we age and as our bodies change? And since this is part 3 of a much larger conversation, I want to also point us back to the questions that I posed in the descriptions of part 1 and part 2. The questions in part 2 are, what is your current understanding of disability, and how do you relate to those who are disabled? How can we move away from the medical model and closer to the social model when it comes to understanding disability? And how can we continue to show up and be curious about conversations surrounding disability, language, and accessibility, even when we mess up or feel discouraged? And then going back a little more to part 1 of this conversation, the questions that I posed there are, what does it mean to you to see yourself represented in stories? How can we find the courage to tell our stories, knowing that it matters for us to tell them? And what is the story that you want to tell about yourself? How is it different from the story the world is telling you? That's a lot of questions, a lot to think about. So maybe rewind a couple seconds to listen to those again. And maybe one of them really sticks out to you and that's what you want to keep thinking about this week and spend some time reflecting on. As we know, reflection is a really powerful tool. One other next turn I want to offer you is, of course, to go find Rebekah's book, Sitting Pretty, or also follow her on Instagram. Also, sitting_pretty is her username on there. And she just has some really great stories to tell, and she really embodies authenticity and vulnerability in that story sharing that she does. So those are 2 really good spaces to kind of keep this dialogue going and to explore some more and embrace some of that curiosity you might still have after this conversation. As always, I am supported by the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. This podcast is just one of many initiatives that the CMM Institute has created in order to bring ideals around storytelling and meaning making out into the world so that we can be making better social worlds. Some of those other projects are Cosmo Kids, the Cosmopolis 2045 website, and a number of other things that are in the works right now. So you can use the links that I've included in the description to learn more about any of these projects. Finally, the podcast next turns I want to offer you today are, as always, to share this episode and, of course, the other 2 parts of this conversation with Rebekah with someone that you want to bring into this conversation. Also, take the time to follow us wherever you listen, to leave a rating, to leave a review, and reach out to me if you have more questions or comments or curiosities that you would like to explore with me. You can find me on Instagram at storieslived_stories_told_pod, or you can email me at storieslived.storiestold@gmail.com, or using the Contact Me page on the website, which is www.storieslived.storiestold.com. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.